Well, hey, folks, welcome to the podcast. And I am here with a few of my friends. So David Hawkins is here.
Hello, hello.
Josh Armstrong is here.
What up?
Aaron Wright is here.
Hi.
And I'm here. And, we're going to do like a gimmick, like a podcast shtick. I don't know. If you listen to a podcast, sometimes they just pick some topic and decide to bat it around for a while. And we haven't done one of those yet, so why not circle up and do a shtick? And the gimmick for this one is, I thought it'd be fun if we spent some time talking about albums over the years, however many there may be, that have really stood out to us, that have made a difference in our life, that the Lord has used perhaps in meaningful ways, that we might have a story about. And part of that is to maybe spend some time leaning into the fact that music really, it has a dramatic impact on our lives. It's a big deal for how we experience the Lord, and that facilitates worship. And, it's just this really powerful force multiplier. And so we'll highlight that. And then, I don't know, maybe some of you will get curious and go check out an album or go back and remember one that you haven't thought about for a good long time. So anyway, that's our shtick, and because Josh is sitting right across from me, I'm going to ask him to go first, and then we'll see where it goes from there. Josh, do you have any that stand out to you that we can talk about?
Yeah, I told these guys I got 4 or 5. I don't know how many I'll get to talk about on this because we're all going to be sharing a little bit. But I'm going to start with probably the most uncool one, if that's okay.
That's great.
And
absolutely.
People might stop listening as soon as I say this first album, but I'm going to start with Twyla Paris, Cry for the Desert.
Yes.
And if you were in the room right now, you would see these guys' faces. They're looking at me like, oh boy, what's happening?
You could have given me 1,000 guesses.
Now, here's the thing. So let me say why. A couple reasons why. So for those who don't know, Twyla Paris was this like Christian artist back in the 80s, 90s, maybe early 2000s. Pretty dated, and my mom loved her so much.
She had a range, though. Holy cow, could she sing?
Here's the thing. People don't know this about Twyla Paris. So I knew about her because my mom listened to her in the car all the time. My mom would sing some of her songs in church. My mom has a beautiful voice. And so, it's nostalgic because being with my mom. Mm-hmm. But I tell you what, I leaned back into that album in particular because I don't know how I came back across it. The album's called Cry for the Desert. The whole idea was her going and writing music about places where she could be alone in the desert with God, whatever that meant for her. And a lot of people don't know, but Twyla Paris was a missionary kid. So she grew up on the mission field, had this incredible perspective. There are 2 songs on that album in particular. One is called Fix Your Eyes, and the tagline of the song is "Say unto my soul, fix your eyes on Jesus." And I still sing that song to myself during like quiet times or hikes or whatever. And the other one is a song called "How Beautiful." And a lot of people know that. It was pretty popular back in the day, years ago. But there's a line of that says, "How beautiful the radiant bride who waits for the groom with his light in her eyes." And it's talking about the church and waiting for the kingdom to come. And there have been times when I've wanted to kind of give up on the church in my life, like periods of deconstruction. And then that line, I go back to that. It really brings me back. So anyway, there you go. Starting it off with a doozy, Twyla Paris, baby.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
It's a real debate about how you even say that name. I've heard some weird. Well, there's no actual debate, but there's a lot of. I've heard her name mispronounced. I'll just say that.
Twila.
Yeah, it's gotten weird.
Twila Paris.
Twila Paris.
Gone off the rails already. So somebody else better go quick.
The one who started with Twyla Paris.
Sorry.
Okay, well, if we want to talk about someone with an incredible range, which we can all agree,
Always. Yeah.
My one of my most formative albums is by Tori Kelly. So she released a gospel album back in 2018 called Hiding Place. And first of all, like listening to Tori Kelly and her just absolute God-given skill is incredible. And her range and just all of those things are incredible. But the thing I love about Hiding Place is, so she's not a like quote unquote Christian artist or whatever, but she is a Christian who, writes music and sings, and she used this album kind of as it was just like an anthem for her. One of the songs on it's called Soul's Anthem, and it was like right after she had lost her grandfather, who was like a huge influence to her faith. And I think that was like the first time that I ever saw somebody who was a musician, who was a Christian, do both of those things without like feeling like being a Christian was their professional job. You know what I'm saying? Like, does that make sense? So that album was huge, not only because it's just Tori Kelly, and everyone who even has been remotely around me knows that I'm like obsessed with her, but also like just to watch somebody who is, you know, a pop artist, but is a believer and who represents that really well. And I think that's been really
that whole crossover thing where it's, we're not a Christian band, we're Christians in a band.
Yeah, which is like, it's, you know, the nuances of that can be whatever, but I don't know. I think that's why I like it so much, just 'cause I feel like she exemplified that really well. And I feel like, you know, she just chooses to live a life that honors the Lord, even if she's not singing worship songs in every album. I don't know. I'm her number one fan.
I think our age gap is showing. I'm quite a bit older than you are, Aaron, because when you said someone, I think you'd indicated it was a female with incredible range. I thought you were going to say Sandy Patty.
Oh no! Oh no! Yikes!
That's a long time
Nobody
ago.
best be hating on Sandy Patty.
Hey, she's a powerhouse.
Come on.
I would never besmirch the name. What about you, Dave? You want to take a swing?
Sure. So we've kind of been on this, some older ones. I guess for me, the one that comes to mind is when I was younger, and it had already been released, but DC Talk, Jesus Freak, and that's almost kind of like low hanging fruit because it's just awesome. But for me, it was like the first time. So we were talking earlier, and this happened at music and drama camp, which is what I did when I was a kid.
Yeah,
so it was super cool. Not really, and I played trumpet most years.
Ooh.
Yeah, not real well.
Interesting
but
factoid.
That was what I did. But I was just obsessed with all things guitars and drums and listening to those songs with friends there. And this was the first time that it was explained to me, or that I understood that what I'm listening to on these songs is not just the three guys, that there's like a mountain of musicians that contribute and track guitars. I'm like, what you mean? So I'm hearing 8 guitar or whatever the number, and not just one. I was like, oh, this makes way more sense, because I was trying to wrap my head around
How
like
one person could play.
How are they doing all of this? But yeah, it's just that. Yeah, it's still to this day something I'm like, man. Anytime those songs come on, I'm like, I'm in, folks.
Yeah.
I don't dance, but if I did, those would be it. Yeah.
Guys, Jesus Freak was a really big deal. That album was huge. That was in the whole like thing where the church was trying to prove to broader culture, you know, anything you can do, we can do just as well. You know, you've got your rock music, and we've got our rock music, and you've got your rap music, and we've got our rap music, and then like Jesus Freak was like top 10.
Yep.
And,
I feel
we're
like
doing it. We're winning.
It was one of those that wasn't, and this is just my perspective, that wasn't you guys remember when like it was very common for there just to be a Christian version of something like the pop culture?
Right.
Yes.
To me, it wasn't that. It was like, no, this is like legit. Like, this is just music that's awesome.
Yeah, it wasn't a carbon copy.
But not, because there was like some really like campy, like, you know, change the words to oldie songs, and, you know, anyway.
Well, yeah, and I think part of what like stood out about it was the quality of it, is because before, if there was a Christian version of something, the quality was noticeably lesser. And so I think DC Talk was like, that album in particular, the quality of the music was really good for the time, and it didn't matter what the subject matter was of it, you know, and people took notice of that, I think.
You got to think that album's coming out right when Nirvana's doing their thing, Pearl Jam's doing their thing,
Right.
Oasis, and that album could go toe-to-toe with any of their best albums during that time period, just the quality.
And it is one of those start-to-finish albums where, like, every track's pretty good. You're not skipping any tracks. You can go all the way through. And I will say this about that, too, and maybe this just points to the fact that it was just full-stop good music, which is, this is, whenever Sharon and I are, like, on a road trip, and we want to go down memory lane and play some old songs, the kids absolutely hate it. They're just, they want it to end immediately. But not Jesus Freak. They sing along, and we all cut loose on that one. They accept it.
I can still rap that song. I'm not going to.
Yeah,
honest,
let's
but
a little sample,
love
maybe,
it.
just a little.
Yeah. There's a couple of offensive lines in that actually. So no, actually,
Marmalade
Aaron,
jelly.
My mind went to marmalade jelly too.
Oh no.
Took me a while.
Oh no.
Oh, go ahead, Dave.
I had
Do,
the
do your
rhythm
thing,
of
man.
his
Do your
belly with
thing.
my head.
Do your thing, Hawkins.
No,
I want to
thank
hear
you.
Amax. Let's go, McCarter.
All right, yeah. So the first one I thought of was, this is a 2013 album, so I'm a little newer than you
Yeah.
guys. Good grief. Oh, well, I guess
More contemporary.
Not you and me, but this is still almost 10 years ago. Actually, the truth is the first 5 albums I thought of were all Carmen albums, but I thought let's spare the people. But 2013,
Carmen put on a really good live show.
he did put on it.
Just saying.
I
Carry
got
on.
fake saved at one of those live shows just so I could go forward and see Carmen in person.
my
He put on a
God.
great show if you're into circuses for sure.
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I didn't. We'll edit that.
Will we
No, we
have-
won't.
Wants to unhear those things, don't you? No, this is Samuel Lane, who's a worship leader in the UK at the Vineyard churches there, and the album's called The Fire. And it is, first of all, it's just kind of in the same, this is, I know, high praise for, a much lower production budget, but like, it's just really, really good, like track for track, really stands out as exceptional music. But my general appreciation for Samuel Lane as a worship leader, as a singer in general, is his voice is just so raw and emotive, and it just, I don't know how, he just oozes feeling. And you can't sing along with Samuel Lane and be emotionally disengaged in the process. And that album came at a time, for me, the timing, for me, it's almost always, when I think about albums that made a difference, it's about where I was in my life when that album hit.
Right.
And because of where I was at, it made ripples.
Yeah.
And so this could probably be true of several other albums as well. But I was at a point to where I the more I thought about it, I think I just was a little bit embarrassed maybe on some sort of low level that I was, when I was young, so incredibly emotionally wrapped up into the worship albums that I really liked, like all the passion stuff.
Yep.
And I was like just head over heels for that stuff. And then feeling like, hey, Aaron, maybe you just got a little too caught up in the emotional side of worship. You got a little too caught up. And then just in my own private worship, it became more, a little bit more reflective, a little bit more introspective, all of that. And that's fine, but I was still missing something, just sort of that raw, just from the gut worship. And Samuel Lane, this album came along, and there is no staying emotionally disengaged when you worship along to this song. I mean, to that album, the way he sings, the lyrics that he writes, the way that whole album works. And there are songs on that really hold up. Now, almost a decade later, we did one of them at worship night on Sunday night, Fall Afresh, right? I think it's a first track on that album. Fiery Love is just pure, I don't know, energy. So anyway, it woke up something in me that had been lying dormant somewhat, to where it's just this sort of raw emotional aspect of worship that I just sort of let slip. And it was one that, like, I don't play the guitar, but I can sort of bang out cowboy chords. And it was one where I had to get chord sheets for every one.
Yeah.
And I had to spend lots of time with every track, playing them horribly, singing them horribly, but because it just, it seeped down in my bones. And it was like months where that was like the default album that I went to again and again. That one meant a lot to me.
I think that balance is so hard with worship music, is like that holistic piece of, man, these words really mean something. And they're theologically sound, and like they hold so much weight, but also I can connect emotionally with it too. I think that's not often the case. And I think more and more I've seen, different things, but I think especially back then it was either, like you're saying, maybe really emotionally charged, but if you would read the lyrics, you'd be like, oh, I don't really know about that. Or kind of the other way around, where those theologically, lyrically rich things you could almost detach from in some ways. So yeah, that's huge to have an album that you can connect with both ways.
Yeah. And to sort of blow on some of those embers. So
Right.
What about it, Josh? Give us another one.
I'll throw 3 specific albums in together, but just around one genre that meant a lot to me, and it's going to be, I don't know. I feel like every time somebody does some type of podcast like this, where you're talking about music and favorite albums, somebody's going to bring up Bob Dylan. But I legit,
I knew you were going to say Bob Dylan.
You know what, man? Here's why. Here's why. When I was in college, and going through all the stuff college students go through, whatever. And super moody and angsty and excited about justice and things like that. I remember just like getting turned on to Dylan's early stuff, which had what people call protest songs. Dylan wouldn't call it that. but I think what turned me on most to Dylan's music was just the poetry. I mean, he was a legit poet, and I love poetry. And as I really dug into his lyrics, I was like, man, I didn't know people could write music like this, like put stuff to music. And then, so I guess Dylan and his disciples really have like influenced my life since college. Just these singer-songwriters who take lyrics really seriously. I guess 2 Dylan albums, Bringing It All Back Home was an incredible. There's a track on that album called The Gates of Eden. It's not a real well-known Dylan track, and for me, it's a deep cut, and it's so good. And then another album, one of his early ones, which is the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan, had Don't Think Twice, It's All Right, which, gosh, go listen to that song right now. Stop listening to this podcast. And I'll mention one other album, talk about a disciple of Dylan. I would consider Sufjan Stevens a disciple of Dylan. And he had this album, it's much more new because my nostalgic side has come out so far on this podcast. But a few years ago, Carrie and Lowell, and that was him mourning the death of his mom. And I remember just like over the last few years, that album, in terms of grief, because I've had some loss over the last few years, that is like my go-to grief album. And it's beautiful. There's a track on there called No Shade in the Shadow of the Cross. And oh man, gets in your bones.
And let me push in a little bit on that statement you just made. Your go-to grief album?
Oh yeah.
Say something about that.
Oh, I was so afraid of grief most of my life. I would say up to about, I don't know, I started thinking about what it meant to mourn and grieve well and contemplate death and stuff that I thought was really icky before. And probably when I was around 30, I don't know, through a series of events. And I think, so many church traditions look at all 4 seasons of life, but a lot of church traditions neglect winter, and winter's a real thing, and it's hard to appreciate spring and resurrection if you can't press into grief and mourning and death. And I think it's healthy when done in the right way, and so that album is one of the ways that helps me.
Yeah, that's really good. So maybe we were doing something of an order here. I'm going to go out of order because the other album I wanted to talk about was for a bit there, without me even knowing I needed it, was a go-to grief album for me, which is David Beloche, which is a name you probably no one's heard. But Paul Beloche was a Vineyard guy, and you've probably heard that name. This is actually his son, who has just done one full-length album. It's called Labyrinth. It came out in 2017, and it's just it's reflective. It's prayers. It's almost exclusively scripture. Like every lyric is just lifted from the verses of scripture. And that hit me at a time, 2017, where I was just, I don't know, man. I think I was depressed. That was a really bad year. That was the worst year. Like I've had a lot of really good ones. 2017 was just awful. And I was so sad about a lot of things in 2017. And this is weird because I was oddly calculated about the whole thing, because I was like, man, I've got a whole stack of emotions I have to do something with. But I thought, all right, what would be the best strategic approach? Which is a weird thing to do. That reminds me of one time when I'm not one who like flies off the handle. Like when I get mad, I usually go inward. I don't go outward. But I remember one time as a little kid. This has nothing to do with the album, by the way. But one time as a little kid, I knew that people would like get mad and punch things. And I was like, I'm really mad. I should punch something. And so I was like, okay, what would be a good thing to punch? And I remember going into the basement and looking specifically for something. I was like, I want something to punch that when I punch it, it'll hurt real bad, but it won't break my hand. And if I break it, I won't get in trouble for breaking it. Or like I really thought the whole thing through. And then I punched like a plastic Coca-Cola crate, like used to with
Yeah.
cola bottles.
Yeah.
And it hurt real bad. And afterwards, I was like, well, I'm just more mad now because now my hand hurts. It didn't work at all. But I really sort of thought through it. Anyway, I kind of did the same thing with this album. I was like, I knew I was a little bit on the edge of going to a dark spot. And, when you're in those dark places, you kind of want to listen to the sad, haunting music or whatever it might be. And I thought, I know enough to know that if I'm going to let myself listen to music that could potentially be sad, it needs to be like scripture, like through and through. And what was interesting about that is, sure enough, man, it ended up being, all right, I'm going to have some time of prayer and I'm going to put on this album just because it's scripture. Then I fell in love with the album. It's beautiful. It's just so beautiful. And then I found myself wanting to leave it on after prayer time was done. And then, this is not an exaggeration, for months it was just on essentially all day, every day. And I remember kind of in the middle of that thinking, this is one of the most beautiful albums I've ever heard, and I'm not going to be able to enjoy it in the future because I'll look back on it and it'll just be associated with all this sad stuff.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, bummer, but so be it. This is what I need. And then what happened is I just kept listening to it day after day, week after week, and even month after month as I came out of that and into a place where I felt actually like I'd really been renewed and restored. And I was still listening to that album every day. And so now when I go back and listen to it, I don't associate it just with those sad places, but also getting pulled out of that. And so again, just like before, it's about where an album hits you with where you're at in your life. And so that one caught me not just to the dip, but through it and out of it. And I still recommend that, especially if you're looking for like, what's a soundtrack for something to have on the background while I pray or think or reflect. That's the one to go to. Labyrinth.
That's interesting talking about like the timing of things, because one of mine I listened to and like loved all the songs, but I didn't really need them right then. But like I needed them in the next season. And so that was a really crazy thing that I felt like was a gift to me, where I wasn't really going through it at the time when I heard the songs. And then like right after I'd been like, oh yeah, that was a good album, and like moved on. It was like everything hit the fan, and like I needed all those songs. And then they were like, I knew them all by heart. It's called There Is More, and it's a Hillsong one from 2018. And so there's a song there called Seasons that talks about a seed being planted under the ground, and how even if there's snow on the ground, that there's like all these processes in the seed happening during the winter time, so that when spring breaks, it can break through the surface. And like the line in that song says, I believe that my season will come. And then there's another one called New Wine, where it talks about in the crushing, God is making new wine. It has other good ones. Who You Say I Am is on there. Remembrance is on there. So Will I is on there.
So good.
All like that most people are really familiar with. But yeah, so I listened to all those, and it was something kind of different for me. It was kind of not things I'd really been listening to. And so like during the time when it came out and I was listening, I was like, yeah, these are cool. These are different, whatever. And then the next like couple of years, like 2019, 2020, were just like really difficult in my life.
Something happened in 2020? Or?
Yeah. Some people might have had a weird year in 2020. I don't really know. Yeah, like we brought our daughter home in 2019 in October, like right before all the COVID stuff hit. I mean, like just those two. Yeah. And so it was like, singing that I believe that God is still working in me when the seed of my life feels really cold and dead under the ground. Like it was just really powerful. And just believing that sometimes in those crushing times is when He's making something new and good in your life. And that was a really interesting timing thing, where it was like I didn't really know I was going to need them as much as I ended up needing them. So
that is a good album.
Yeah, that actually reminds me. I'm jumping in again, but I don't have like David's next. This isn't on my list, but as you said that, it reminded me of a Chris Renzema song, and then I was like, how do I not have Chris Renzema on my list? Guys, look up Chris Renzema. Talk about like a hybrid worship singer songwriter guy and a poet, man. But he's got a great song about seasons, and the line is the hook of it is God made 4 seasons but only one spring.
Yeah.
The song's actually called Let the Ground Rest, which is essentially when the snow is on the ground and it feels like there's nothing happening, actually exactly what needs to be happening is happening.
Yeah.
And we just resist that seasonal reality to life because we want it to be spring all the time. But he made 4 seasons, only one spring. And also, that was my excuse to say Chris Renzema because it's got to happen. He's the guy where I'm like, how is he not the most famous of all the peoples? And he hasn't really gone mainstream, but man, I'm waiting for it. Yeah. What you got, David?
Well, so it's not an album per se, but an artist that I've just recently been more introduced to. So Taylor Leonhardt. Mm-hmm. So she led at the worship leader retreat. Which was fantastic, killer voice, all the things. And the song she did that was like, man, it just landed. I sent it to you, the song Behold. Mm-hmm. And it's on like a 3
times in a row.
Yeah, right? Me too. Like a lot. It's one of those that the lyrics are like all the things, like every word. I'm like, yes, that. And then I'm describing a song is what I'm doing. Then the music and like all the different pieces, but it's one of those melodies that I find myself just like, man, even if I don't have words, like just that. And it's one that will pop up, unprompted, when I'm just doing whatever things. And it's like, man, there it is again. Mm-hmm. So that's when I would definitely say, if you're looking for something to check out, check that one out.
And the song Behold
by Taylor Leonhardt. Yeah.
Like, she's if you wanted to know what the song's about, it's about joining God in the renewal of all things. Yeah. It's about the mission of our church, and in the most beautiful way.
Yeah.
And there's songs like that, like All Things Rise, for example, is a song about joining God in the renewal of all things. This song is completely different in every way, but at the very core, it's about the mission of our church and what we're about.
He's making all things new.
So good.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give one more. So, and it's more a plug for the artist, so I'll just say his greatest hits. And I think he had like 3 greatest hits albums. Again, I mentioned Dylan, who's always mentioned on any podcast about albums, and this guy is mentioned on any podcast about Christian albums, and that's Rich Mullins. But Rich Mullins is just so. You talk about how formative he was for me. And so like greatest hits wise, I would throw a couple songs on that people should definitely check out. I mean, Sometimes by Step is like still in the morning. I sing that song as I'm like walking the dog or whatever. Oh God, you are my God, and I will ever praise you. I will seek you in the morning. And that's just a incredibly powerful, consistent song in my life.
It's another one of those songs that just drips emotion. You cannot sing that song and not feel a thing. If so, you're dead inside.
There's another song called If I Stand that's so beautiful. And then there's a line from one that people don't know quite as well. Calling Out Your Name is the name of the song. There's a line in it that says, the hope that this thirst will not last long, that it will soon drown in a song not sung in vain. I see the thunder, I hear the thunder in the sky. I see the sky about to rain, and with the heavens I am calling out your name. Come on, man. Yeah. Rich Mullins, and died way too young, but man, his songs have become anthems for the church for a long time now.
And rightfully so.
Very formative for me. You got one more, you right?
How much time do we have?
I was about to say, Aaron, before this podcast, we were like, I got 2 or 3, and Aaron was like, I've got 27.
Yeah. Call that like a good thing or a judgment. I don't know. I do want to talk about super fast. A couple of mine have a lot to do with the way that they have bent the genre, which has been really cool. So Make Room by Jonathan McReynolds, and then just all of Maverick City's albums, but the one in particular for me was Volume 3, Part 1. And I ended up like finding Mav City a little bit later than some folks, and so ended up like hitting these songs. So like Man of Your Word, Promises, Have My Heart, and then kind of going back into their things, finding Refiner, some of those like gems. But so I think that the way that they just chose to kind of ignore genres was really cool.
Yeah.
But Make Room by Jonathan McReynolds is an album for me that holds so much weight, and I think I'm still discovering all the reasons for that. But the title track for that one is great, Make Room. Lover of My Soul, I'm Not Lucky, I'm Loved. But the one that, like, I still don't really, I don't know the implications of fully even yet, is a song called Cycles.
Oh, yeah.
That is a good song.
First of all,
holy cow.
The riff in that is incredible, and he could do that all day, which makes me really mad. But
vocally, he's ridiculous.
That's what I'm trying to say. Is like, who can do that? No one but Jonathan Reynolds. But the song Cycles talks about just breaking free from the cycles in your life, and he mentions some specific things, and he even kind of just like at the end tags on like generational cycles, financial cycles, and he lists out things. And I feel like, because I like to listen to like the live version, I feel like probably the Holy Spirit was like prompting him to say those things. But I don't know, just something about having the opportunity to declare in a song that you're choosing not to live in the cycles that either you have been choosing or you've been wrestling with is really powerful. But both of those, I feel like, have broadened my idea about worship music and Christian music and all the things, just the way they have bent some genres. So that's the only ones I'll say.
My first time hearing that Cycle song, I loved it musically, but I was like, is this like a little too direct? Is it just a little too on the nose with the Cycles thing? And I thought, maybe it's a little surfacey. And then I listened to it a couple more times. I was like, this is the most not surfacey. I may not ever plumb the depths of this. I quickly changed it. Like, I think it's a brilliant song. And musically, it's wild too.
Right.
Like, that's very, very cool.
Yeah.
We got any more? Dave, do you want to throw another one out?
Oh, man. Well, Jonathan McReynolds was what I was going to say next, just as another artist. Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
Which we've already talked about him.
Although,
I don't know, you can like go past that. Yeah.
Josh is uncharacteristically silent on the Jonathan McReynolds talk. Is he new to you?
He's new to me, and I'm embarrassed because I feel like this is somebody
you feel like
know.
the guy on the outs.
I do. You sense that, huh?
I did. I could feel.
It's like you've known me for 20 years.
So one of the reasons why we did this podcast is to maybe put some new artists and albums on people's radar. And Josh, I'm just glad we put one on yours.
I was going to say it would be really helpful, and I'm probably putting like Aaron or somebody on the spot, but man, I don't know if we can have like liner notes for this podcast and get these names. I don't know if you
yeah, we can do that.
A few listeners have been taking notes while we're
everyone has been taking copious notes.
Do you know what though? Anyone who's been to our church in a while might have recognized a Jonathan McReynolds song.
Yep.
That song we do, God is Good.
Please.
Oh, that's him. Okay.
Yeah, May Your Troubles Keep You Near the Cross. That's also him. No.
Yes.
Oh, cool. That song is incredible, man. Yeah. So I'll be excited to dig into some
Here's
other
some more
stuff.
of his for sure.
Yeah. You know, I was just with Nick Sutton over in the UK. I was coming back from Africa on a trip. And Nick Sutton, for those who don't know, is kind of the main missions guy for Vineyard UK. Boy, we should have had him on this. That guy knows, he was, coming up with all kinds of stuff I had never heard of before. But it was just a reminder that these are actually really, really helpful conversations because music has been so formative for me, and I know it has been for you guys. And so hopefully this is really helpful to people checking this out. And
it's such a big deal. It's such a beautiful thing. It's one of the gifts that God gives us that maybe we can just run past. Like sometimes when, I haven't done this in a while, but one of the things Bryce and I used to do when I would sort of tuck him in to bed at night, back when he went to bed before I do, which has shifted, but we would go through and just list random things that we wouldn't think of to say thank you for because they're just sort of built into the fabric of society and you never stop. Like if somebody writes you a check that you weren't expected, you're going to be like, oh, awesome, praise the Lord. You'll think because it's so out of the ordinary. But we would be like, he would say mustard a lot. The kid loves mustard. And he was like, who stops to thank Jesus for mustard? Well, maybe you should. But several times we would talk about music would come up and be like, He played the trumpet a bit. And we were like, the trumpet. When's the last time you stopped and thanked Jesus for, and then someone, it would be music, because it's such an incredible gift. Like food, like we could have just had, God could have just designed us to work like cars do. We've got a little fuel compartment, and that's how you get your energy. Instead, there's food and everything and all the joys and creativity that comes from it. And I think music just gets overlooked, and it's absolutely one of those eternal things that will be part of the new kingdom. There's no doubt about that. New heaven and new earth stuff. So anyway, hopefully this is helpful. Thank you guys for sharing some of your stories and some of your albums. And hopefully people have a little to-do list now. They'll pull out some tunes and appreciate some good music.
Awesome.
Thanks, y'all.
All right. Bye.